Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar From Confusion to Compliance, how to get started with EU cybersecurity regulations in ServiceNow. I'm Michelle from marketing, and with me today I have Torbjørn and Christian, and I'll introduce them a little bit later. But let me just quickly sum up what this topic is about today. So this webinar, we're going to look at how you work with regulations today and dive into the compliance challenges of tomorrow, or well, 24. We'll give you some practical insights, and then we will show you real world solutions in ServiceNow, where we then can hopefully help you structure and create documentation you need in the future. So let me move on to a little bit of the practical stuff before we look at the agenda. So the practical stuff is, of course, this webinar is in English, if you haven't noticed. Also, this webinar will be recorded. And so we are talking for about 45 minutes. We hope we can stay on time. We have a lot of things to say. There will come out an email for you guys tomorrow with all the usable links and the recording and all the things you need. So one last thing I would say about the practical stuff is there's a Q&A function you can use in the bottom of your screen. You should be able to ask questions, and the default mode, it goes privately to us, so you can be completely anonymous about what you're going to say. And then please put in your email, because then if we don't get to the question at the end of this webinar, we can write to you directly afterwards with an answer. So I think we're going to move on to the next slide, please. Yeah, so the agenda for today, very quickly, I will talk about the speakers in a little while. Then we're going to talk about the compliance challenge, how you're probably handling compliance and risk today, why you should use ServiceNow, and 3 things that will simplify your life. And then we have some demo time, and then we will have the Q&A in the end. And next slide. So today's speakers, we have Christian. Can you say hi, Christian?
Hello.
Yeah, so Christian, he's the head of ServiceNow IRM solutioning covering EMEA. He works as solution architect advisor on ServiceNow projects, including DORA, NIS2, and ISO 27001. How did I put it too many zeros? I'm not sure. And then he has some ServiceNow certifications, and then he has the ISO, I'll try again, 27001 lead implementer certification. And he is based in Copenhagen. He has a little daughter, and he is a football coach, but he could be released for his from his contract if anything comes up. You can see his experience, but I don't want to, name drop companies, but you can see that in the bottom of the screen. Then we have Torbjørn. He's head of SecOps delivery, and he also has a lot of impressive things on his repertoire. I'm not going to dive into all the abbreviations here, but you can see he's also very skilled within his area. And then he's based in Oslo. He don't want me to mention the year he's born, but you can probably calculate forward to that one. He's a dad as well, and he's a CISO for hire. So we have a football coach for hire, and we have a CISO for hire. You choose what you want. And his experience is just as impressive. So yeah, I think that was what I had to say for now, and I'll come back in the end and wrap up with all the questions and answers. But now, without further ado, I will give the word to Torbjørn. Enjoy.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks you all for attending. So let's dive deep a bit into the compliance challenge. For many of us, we have to admit that up until recently, for many companies, IT security have maybe for management seen more like an inconvenience than a strategic element for growth. I've been working with cybersecurity for 15 years, holding both advisory and management positions. And I have to admit that I personally felt it when management didn't want to commit to security. Even though we saw fires everywhere, management like cybersecurity is not important. It's like when they didn't see the value it brought to the company and felt like it was more annoyance than and that breaches were just something theoretical that happened in the news. Hence, as we see in this picture, IT security always was last to pick when they were dealing out fundings. So usually IT got their budgets, and what was left of IT's budget was given to cybersecurity. And I think maybe one of the worst things I've seen is when we are implementing ServiceNow IRM, is that when we are actually implementing the overview of the controls, putting them into monitoring state, looking at all the risks, we kind of see, okay, we have the actual state of the environment, and then we get access to audits. We see audits that have been done by financial audits or other government entities, and those audits look shiny, they look perfect. But then we look in IRM and we see, well, it's not really that perfect. And that means that in many cases, management might not actually see the real state of the environment because IT has sugarcoated it. And that's why it's important to have a system where you can actually see the exact state of your compliance and risk. And I don't think this is because management is bad. I think it's that, but I think that they actually believe that nobody really cares and that they won't be breached. But that last picture is about to change. Now management actually have to commit to security. There's a lot of requirements coming, but for us cyber heroes, those requirements may actually give us the rationale to convince management that security is important and give us the funding to fix the stuff we've been screaming about fixing for years. The current geopolitical landscape and increased dependencies on IT, on critical infrastructure, has made several different European entities decide that there's time for change. It's not enough for a state leader to go out and say security is important, please do that. No, we actually need some directives and governing rules to ensure that people do security. So we all, looking at this slide, we see that we start with GDPR. We all know GDPR by now. It's that requirements on how you handle personal identifiable information and reporting obligations when PII is lost. That was kind of the first cyber regulation. And the funny thing is about GDPR is, of course, you have the fines, but those fines are often just happens after you've been breached. No one looks into the state before you're actually breached. And that is what is going to change. First, we have DORA, which is the Digital Operation Resilience Act. That will set the requirements on how financial institute will do cybersecurity, focusing on operational resilience. And then we will have Network and Information Security Directive 2, or NIS2, which is a directive that will set a requirement for critical infrastructure. Something that is interesting to know, if you're a financial institution under Article 4 in NIS2, DORA outranks NIS2 in many areas. So you don't need to comply with both in some areas, such as the reporting obligations. Both DORA and NIS2 aim to establish a consistent cybersecurity framework across the EU. However, the exact nature of technical controls is subject to interpretation and adoption by each member state, meaning that there might be slight variation between different countries, but the overarching principles should be similar. Next slide, please. Both NIS2 and DORA contains a few dates. I'm not going to dig into all the details, but I just want you to touch in on the most important dates. For DORA, there are two dates that are especially important. It's the first date is the release of the first batch of controls. That will be in January 2024. And then there's a second release of security controls in July 2024. These batches will contain the technical requirements that member states need to implement. And then it's up to the member state to do adoptions of these controls. But that means that when those dates come, you can start looking into the technical requirements and see that the overarching principles. And by January 2025, you need to comply with those requirements. Under NIS2, the member state needs to create local controls that needs to be implemented based on the initial NIS2 directive, and those will go into effect October 17, 2024, and you need to comply by October 18, 2024. So those are the most important dates is January 2025 and October 2024. If we first look at NIS, I think that NIS is the one that goes to hit the most companies. We see that in NIS2, there will be a lot of more industries included. If you look on this slide, we see the difference between NIS1 and NIS2. NIS2 cover mostly the traditional critical infrastructure, such as energy, drinking water, etc. While when we move into NIS2, they see that, okay, critical infrastructure is what people are dependent on to basically live. That means that they now include also food supply chain, public administration, chemicals and manufacturing, and other parts of industries. I think many people will be shocked to see that they're now actually covered under NIS2 and have these requirements. All these regulations might seem a bit overwhelming, but the good thing is there's a lot of overlap. And there's also a lot of overlap in existing standards and frameworks, such as ISO 27001. If we look at the difference between DORA and NIS, of course, the most important part is that DORA will focus on financial institutes, while NIS2 will focus on critical infrastructure. They both have a requirement that management is responsible for cybersecurity, meaning that it's not enough, like we see with many ISO 27001 implementation, that management signed off on the document to say, now we agree that cybersecurity is important. No, they actually have to commit to it and have experience running cybersecurity programs. ICT risk is important in both, that you need a system to monitor and report on risk. You need to do incident response. You need to information sharing. So if there's an incident, you need to share that with the sector and with the government entities. Operational resilience testing is important in both DORA and NIS2. But the main difference here is that the DORA explicitly also mentioned penetration testing more extensively. I will dig more into details on these slides later. Both NIS2 and DORA mention third-party risk and vendor risk management. Both have government requirements, meaning technical controls, such as you need to have multi-factor authentication, etc. Both set requirements for competence and responsibility, and both have audit requirements, meaning that now people can come look you in the card to see that you actually comply with these regulations. And the last one is business continuity and crisis management, where you need to ensure that you build a redundant, good infrastructure. Next slide. So management commitment. Both of them emphasize the importance of management being accountable for cybersecurity and ICT risk management. That means that management is responsible for allocating resources for managing cybersecurity and ICT risk, but they're also responsible for understanding cybersecurity and managing the security program. Something that's specific for DORA is that it explicitly mentioned that management needs to do cybersecurity training, meaning that they don't only need to do the mandatory, acceptable use policies or cybersecurity training, though they need to be actually trained on the ICT risks and on managing a cybersecurity program. That is also mentioned in NIS2, but specifically in DORA. Talking about risk management is an essential part of both DORA and NIS2. DORA explicitly mentioned that organizations governed by DORA are required to pinpoint their critical assets or important functions and chart their assets and dependencies, meaning that you need to have an updated CMDB with how each service is interconnected, their criticality, their ownership, and you need to define their life cycle. This is also mentioned in the asset management part of NIS2, but it is explicitly mentioned in DORA that you need to have an updated CMDB with dependencies and connections. And then we have incident response. Companies must have incident detection mechanisms, so they need to have antivirus, EDR, log monitoring, etc. But the most important part here is that they need to have a document process and they can't do things ad hoc anymore. You need to, coming back to that reporting obligations, you need to document your findings and efforts in the timeline. So if you have a security incident, you need to document your indicator of compromise, you need to create the lessons learned, and you need to have a detailed timeline so that both management, but also the managing authorities can go back and see that you actually done the right steps and then that you have done a proper investigation. That means that you should have a system in place that handles this for you in a structured way. We will briefly touch in on it about SecOps, ServiceNow SecOps later today, that does exactly this by using playbooks and flows. And these reports that are then captured by the incident response will then be those that you send for government during reporting. And of course, both of them require that there will be established national CSERTs to coordinate incident efforts between organizations in the same sector. And there will be a lot of focus about vendor risk management going forward. That means that under DORA, it's mostly focused on third-party risks in IT system and outsourcing partners. DORA also requires specific contractual terms to be added to agreements with IT service providers. Those requirements will come from the local member states when they create their requirements. And NIS2 will focus more on the vendor risk management and the supply chain, meaning that if you deliver services to someone in critical infrastructure, you also need to apply to all these regulations. And I think that that is maybe what people are not prepared for, is that if you have, if you deliver services to either company under DORA or under NIS, they will set the requirements for you. You will be audited to check that you are compliant. And if you are not able to comply with the regulations under NIS2, they might choose another vendor for delivering their services because they are obligated by law to ensure that their entire supply chain focus on security. And that vice versa, you need to ensure that your supply chain is adherent to the controls that you are obligated to handle. And that means that you need a system to track vendors and to do audits and verification. And that's really hard to do if you have 50 or 100 vendors. So you need a system that automates this. And that's why we will touch a bit into vendor risk management module in ServiceNow later on. And then we have reporting and control. Under DORA, if a major IT-related incident has impact on the financial interest of your clients, the company shall, without undue delay, report that and inform the clients about the incident. Under NIS2, companies shall now notify authorities and CSERT of significant incident within 24 hours for early warning and submit a detailed incident report within 72 hours and provide a final comprehensive report within 1 month. Meaning that you can't do this ad hoc. You need to have a structure. You need to have a certain way of reporting and handling incidents. Next slide. Both NIS2 and DORA will require you to perform vulnerability management and build resilient infrastructure, meaning that you are able to take a hit. Your infrastructure should be able to do that. The specific thing about DORA is that financial institutes are mandated to establish a resilience testing program to be conducted at least a year. That means penetration testing. Additionally, they are required to carry out threat-led penetration testing at least every 3 years. So you need to test that your infrastructure is secure, and then you will be obligated to report those risks to management. And if management don't take that seriously, they will, as we can see in some later slides, get personal fines. So it's cybersecurity is changing. Next slide, please. I think this might be one of the most controversial slides. That this is the fines and for not being compliant. Under DORA, you can get up to 2% of your yearly global sales in fines, and you can also get 5 million euros in fines if you intentionally do not report cybersecurity incidents that affect your customers. The most controversial part here, that is kind of the game changer, is that they will also put individual fines, meaning that if you're a CIO, a CEO, or a CISO, or CFO, or anyone in top management that intentionally withhold information about a cybersecurity breach or ignore known risk, you can get personal fines of up to 1 million euros. And there's already proof in the UK that someone's gotten a fine for 80,000 euros for a breach that happened. And personally, I can afford that. So if something happens in my infrastructure, I would report that. And that change means that management needs to commit to security. Under NIS2 directive, there will be a maximum fine of at least 10 million euros or 2% of yearly global revenue, whichever is more. And we all know under GDPR, it's up to 20 million or 4% of yearly global turnover, whichever is greater. So yeah, basically you don't want those fines. So how are you probably handling compliance and risk today? Or how do we see many companies handle this today? Well, the truth is there's spreadsheets. There's so many spreadsheets. And what we see is that people have different departments, different organizations, different people working on their own independent spreadsheets with risk that is impossible to track because they might put the risk into a spreadsheet, but there's no flow to following up that those risks are mitigated. They might have gone through an ISO 27001 review at some point and put in all their controls, but there's no state showing the actual state of the controls if they are implemented. And incident response is often done ad hoc as best. They might have really good analysts, but those analysts, they just want to close the ticket and move on. They don't think about the reporting obligations that come afterwards. And next slide. This is why we're talking about what might happen in the future. How you can use ServiceNow to gain management respect by defining, monitoring, and reporting on compliance and risk in ServiceNow. So that's over to you, Christian.
Thank you very much, Torbjørn. So now it's time to be a bit more specific about what ServiceNow can do. So first, I have a few slides to give you some context, and then I'll give a live demonstration of some of the capabilities. So the first thing I want to show here is the 360 overview. So ServiceNow is also referred to as the platform of platforms. And that basically means that you have one platform and one data model. So what you see in the picture here is that everything is connected to an asset. So the circle that you see in the middle, an asset, that can be a business service, it can be an application, it can be a department, it can be a server, it can be whatever, and it can both be IT and OT. So for example, when you do a risk assessment, it is automatically stored in your repository of risk assessments, but it's also connected to the asset itself. And the same goes for when you identify vulnerabilities or when you look at indicators or ownership and so on. All of that is connected to the asset. And that means that we can leverage other people's work, and we're always working with the latest and greatest information. So in ServiceNow, you have the 360 overview. As mentioned by Torbjørn, you need to approach the cybersecurity challenges from different angles. And with ServiceNow, you have access to a bunch of different modules. So that could be the risk management, audit management, business continuity management, and so on. And you also have a lot of different integration possibilities. So that could be that you are working with Splunk today, or maybe you are connected to different regulatory sources. Then you can integrate to those. And you can also integrate to other systems that you have in your current environment. The last thing I want to show is that ServiceNow is putting a lot of money and time into their R&D. And that results in 2 annual releases. The same goes for the cybersecurity space. And I attended the confidential roadmap session for risk and ESG last week. And the roadmap looks great, absolutely. So what we see here is an overview of the different modules that can be used with ServiceNow. So we have the traditional ITSM ones, so change management, incident management, problem management, and so on. We also have field service management, we got DevOps, and then we have the boxes in blue. So we got policy and compliance, risk management, and so on in the integrated risk management piece. Then we got the business continuity management ones, and then we got the security operations one. So Torbjørn showed this one, and I've added the ServiceNow modules. So what we have done here is basically just to show that the mapping between the ServiceNow modules and NIS2 and DORA. And you could easily have included ISO 27001 or PCI or whatever. And this is basically just to show you that ServiceNow can support the entire NIS2 or DORA or ISO journey or whatever journey, because ServiceNow contains all the relevant module. So let's dive into a live demonstration. So just give me a few seconds here to move stuff around. Here we go. So this is our first webinar on this topic, and we will do more focused webinars soon. So today I will show you the risk management because of the need for risk-based approach. Then I'm going to show you the third-party risk management because you need to manage your vendors in a structured and formalized manner. And then I want to show you the compliance side of things with all the relevant controls that could come from ISO or from NIS2 or from DORA. And then on the later webinars, we will show you the SecOps side, the order management side, business continuity management, and the rest. So let's start with the policies and compliance perspective. So in ServiceNow, you can store all your external and internal requirements. So external requirements can be requirements from ISO, it could be from NIS2, it could be from DORA, it could be from PCI. And then the internal requirements are your own internal policies, procedures, checklists, and so on. So what you see here is that we have the different documents. So we got the COBIT, we got ISO 27001, and we have also built a NIS2 one, even though that is not entirely complete. So if we click the document, we see an overview of the document itself. So we have a description of the document here that is EU approved. We can see what entities or what assets need to adhere to this directive. We can go in and look at the different sections from the document. So what we see here is that we got Article 21, and then we can drill down and get to Article 21.2.j, and this one talks about multi-factor authentication. And what this does is that it enables us to move into the actual controls. So here, require multi-factor authentication. So one of the things we see here is the power of having everything in one platform. So we see that this control is relevant to our business applications and also our critical business applications. We can also see that this control is relevant for our policy on remote access control policy and a procedure. And we also see that this control maps to 3 external requirements. So it relates to a sys control, it relates to an ISO control, and it relates back to the NIS2 control. And in ServiceNow, we work with something which is called test once, comply many. And this means that if you're compliant with this control, you are compliant with all the 3 documents, and you are compliant with the policy and with the procedure. And that's a huge game changer because you don't need to do a test on the same control multiple times. You simply just need to do it once, and then that information will reflect back on the internal and the external requirements. So you will save a lot of time by having the correct mapping. We also have policy exceptions and so on. So let's look at one of the systems that needs to adhere to this control. So here we have a system called attendance and payroll management. And we see here that everything in ServiceNow comes with a workflow. So when you have a spreadsheet, that's just a document and you can't really take any actions on the spreadsheet. But in ServiceNow, every time you do something, it triggers another workflow. So here we have a workflow for a control. So we have a draft, we got a test, review, monitor, and retired. So in the draft state, that's basically ensuring that you have the correct control owner, that the control information is correct, that you have the correct attestation respondent, and so on. In the attest phase, you have a person who would need to attest, yes, I have implemented a control, and that person will also be required to upload some evidence to prove that a control has been implemented. Then we got the review, basically looking at the evidence from the attestation phase. And then in the monitor phase, you will go in and look at the indicators that are running in the background. So in ServiceNow, you can always have the indicators running in the background. And that means by having the attestations and with the indicators, you have a 24/7 overview of your compliance status. So you don't need to gather spreadsheets or talk to anyone. You can simply just go into your ServiceNow, and then you have a 24/7 overview, the latest and the greatest. Also talked about the 360 overview. So let me go into the attendance and payroll system here. So I can go up here, look at the 360, and then just give it some time to gather information. So what we see here is that this system, attendance and payroll management system, doesn't have any upstream or downstream relationships, but we can see that 7 controls applies to this system. We can see that it's a part of 4 different types, and 9 risks are connected to this system. So if I just click here, on the right-hand side, you can see all the different controls that are relevant to this system. And if I wanted to, I could go in and look at the individual controls. So again, you have the 360 overview and you have the 24/7 overview of your compliance status. So requirements change, and that's just how it is. So for example, with the ISO 27001 going from version 2013 to 2022. So with regulatory change management, that gives you a notification whenever regulations or standards changes. And that gives you a possibility to incorporate those changes into your environment so you can work with those in a structured and formalized manner. So let's say that there are some new changes to NIS2 or to DORA, then you can capture those here, and then you can include those into your organization when you're ready to work with the new changes. We also have a complete library of all the controls, and we also have all the policies. So here you see policies, plans, standard, frameworks, checklists, and so on. We can also do policy lifecycle management, policy acknowledgement, policy exceptions, and so on. But we will save that for a later webinar. So let's move to the risk management side of things. So again, we have the workspace. Here we have a heat map. Here we have different assessments. So here I have an IT risk assessment. I can have privacy risk assessments, or I can look at the operational risk management. So here I have my risk heat map. I can dive a bit deeper in here. I can look at, for example, the reputational risks here. And what I can do is that I can look at the risk trend, and I can see that the first assessment was down here, which was okay, amber, but the last assessment I did, it went up here in the red zone. So clearly things are not going as it's supposed to. We have a control library, and we also have a risk library. So we go in here, we can see all the different risks that we need to adhere to or we need to mitigate in some way. So we can go in and look at a risk here. So we can pick this one, lack of knowledge of applicable regulations. We have different categories with risk management. So that could be operational, it could be IT, it could be project, it could be whatever. We can go in here. And what we see is that We have a risk hierarchy. So on the right-hand side here, we can see that this is a child, and it's a child of employment legislation and regulation, and that one is a child of people. And that means that we can work with risk hierarchies, but we can also work with risk appetite and risk tolerance and aggregate those scores. So you see that the lack of knowledge of applicable regulations, that is within appetite, but the parent one here is outside appetite. And so basically you decide on the risk appetite, and then we have some calculations happen in the background based on the risk assessments, control effectiveness, attestations, and whatever other indicators that you would like to work with. As with the controls, we see that this risk is relevant for critical business applications. We can also see that this risk is already connected to a control, so something that we believe can mitigate this risk already. And we also have indicator template or indicators running in the background. So let's go in and look at how to do a risk assessment. So here I have all my different tasks. So let me just go down to the risk assessments. Here I have the entity, lack of knowledge of applicable regulations. So what you see on the left-hand side, we have the inherent assessment, as you know. So we would go in and score the impact and the likelihood. Then we go in and do a control effectiveness assessment. Then we have the residual assessment. And lastly, we will do a risk response. So here you see that we have impact, so financial, regulatory, client. So all of these factors you can completely decide on yourself. It can also just be the normal or the standard ones, so just impact and likelihood, reputational, market and media, and then down here we have the likelihood. Let's just take almost certain. And based on my responses here, we have some calculations running in the background. So you see we have a high score in the inherent assessment. We see that we already have 2 controls connected to mitigate this risk. We see that one of the controls are non-compliant and this one hasn't been implemented yet. So let's just say that the first one here, allow data subject to opt out, is ineffective, and the last one is also ineffective. We will move that to the residual assessment. And in the background, ServiceNow says, okay, based on the control assessment and based on the inherent assessment, the residual assessment is calculated to be high. If you want to override that, you can easily go in and you can change the computed score. But now it's high, so we want to make a decision what to do. Do we want to accept the risk? If we choose to accept the risk, then a task will be sent to a person in your organization who can determine if the risk can be accepted or not. So no matter what you choose in ServiceNow, a workflow will always be triggered. So if you choose the mitigate one, then a mitigation workflow is triggered. So a team needs to come up with a plan for how to mitigate the risk, what controls should be implemented to mitigate the risk, what is the deadline, what is the impact, do we have any financial risks related to this one. So again, every time you do something, a new workflow will be triggered. And that is a big difference between working with spreadsheets and then working with ServiceNow. So with ServiceNow, each step will automatically trigger the next step without human interference. We got control indicators. We also work with risk indicators, as you can see down here. So we have some risk indicators that are running in the background. Again, we want the 24/7 overview. We work with risk events, so we can go in and look at net loss, expected loss. We also work with near misses, if that's something that you work with. Then we have issue flows, both for risks and for controls. and we also have a way to remediate these issues. So the last thing I want to show you is the third-party risk management. So third-party risk management, let me find it here, covers partners, suppliers, consultants, resellers, franchises, and much, much more. So you can manage and mitigate the risks with your third-party relationship, both from the initial onboarding all the way to the due diligence throughout the entire relationship, and actually all the way to the offboarding. So you have the full visibility across the whole process, but also across the whole third-party ecosystem. So looking here, you can see that we have a list of all our vendors. We can go in here and we can do some due diligence. We can go in and we can do some tiering assessments. We can send out assessments to a third party. And as always, we can also work with issues. So the last thing I want to show you is kind of what I call the last kicker. So we want to avoid sending spreadsheets back and forth. So ServiceNow have created a vendor portal. So let me see if I can show you that one. So what your organization would do is to send a request through ServiceNow to a third party, asking them to fill out a questionnaire and attach some documents. So that vendor would receive a link to this portal, and then that vendor can go in and fill out the assessment and attach whatever documents that you want the person to attach. So here you see that we have a strategic partner risk assessment for a vendor, and the vendor is Acer. So now I'm impersonating the vendor. So here I'm asked to fill out a questionnaire on business resiliency, and they're also asking me to upload a SOC 1 and a SOC 2. If they have questions or can't answer all of the assessments, there is a collaborative issue flow behind that to handle the entire process. So again, you don't need email back and forth. Everything can be handled through the ServiceNow portal. And that was what I wanted to show you today.
Great stuff. Thanks, Christian.
You're welcome.
So we have 1 minute left. Just keep your microphones on, because we had a few questions coming in, and you decide who wants to answer it. I'll just read the first one out loud. How can ServiceNow help if you, oh, sorry, let's change to the slides deck again,
Yeah,
if you can.
I'll do my best.
Yeah, I'll just talk while you do it. So how can ServiceNow help with the incident handling and reporting requirements? Do you just use the normal incident process? Which one of you wants to?
Yeah, I guess I can answer that. No, for this, we use the SecOps module in ServiceNow that is tailored for security incident handling. So the main difference here is that, like Christian mentioned, you have the flows and the playbooks, meaning that the normal incident, you kind of have an open or closed state, while in the cybersecurity incident, we follow what's known as the NIST framework on different steps during the investigation of an incident. So, and it's also built around creating those lessons learned at the end, so that you ensure that you pick up all the steps as part of the incident process, and you ensure that all your analysts do the same work. They follow the same process, because they're kind of forced into documenting in different steps. They can, of course, use their own tools, etc., to do the analysis, but they need to document things in a certain way. That's the SecOps one.
Super. We have hit the 10:45 mark, but please hold on, guys, if you want one more question answered, and then some quick wrap up. So it takes a minute or two if you can stay on, or else you'll have to go back and watch the recording. But so I have one more question. Can you elaborate on how ServiceNow can help with audits? Is it always a pain when we are hit by audits, hunting down the right people, collecting spreadsheets, ensuring they are the right version, and so on? It's very time and resource consuming.
Yeah, let me take that. Yeah, so first of all, it's a great question. Everything is connected in ServiceNow. So let's say you get audited on all your critical business application, then you just choose the critical business applications from a list view in ServiceNow, and then ServiceNow gives you a list of all the risk assessments, all the control tests, all the indicators, all the technical dependencies, all the issues, remediation tasks, and so on, and put those into a list view. And then you can start to work with that information. So you don't need to contact anyone to gather the information. All the information is basically directly available within ServiceNow. And what we normally do is that we advise the companies to create a report template, and that report template will automatically be populated with all the information. And then you can simply just take that report and just hand it over to whoever is auditing you. And so that's a huge time saver. And again, you always have the latest information.
Yeah, and that is especially important going forward. We know that, like I mentioned, vendor risk management, of course, you need to do vendor risk management, but you know that all your customers are also doing vendor risk management and will audit you. And it's nice that they all get the same response, because what we've seen in some businesses is that maybe different part of the business are doing the same, doing different kinds of business with one customer and reports different answers. You want them all to have the same answer. And using ServiceNow and the compliance and audit module, you are sure that they all have the same answers and it's up to date.
Cool. Let's quickly go on. We don't have time to answer any more questions, but feel free to send us an email in the emails I'll show you in a second. So I did say some of this stuff in the beginning, so I'll not say too much, but you'll get an email tomorrow with all the important stuff that I mentioned earlier. And you can always reach out to us for more details or more demos or whatever. We would like to be in conversation with you. I will just mention that we're going to do a webinar around DORA, where we deep dive a little bit more into the CMDB and DORA. And so if you really thought it was interesting to listening to the stuff that we talked about around DORA, then please hang on for the next webinar we will announce soon, and we will actually have a guest speaker on that one. So yeah, that's very exciting. And these two guys will also join us. So if you liked what you saw today, you will like it even more in December. So next slide, please. Here are our contact information. Please don't spam us too much, but we would really like you to reach out to us. If you have any questions that you didn't come up with in this webinar, we'll really like to answer them afterwards. And yeah, I thought we had many good things to talk about today. I really like the term cyber heroes. I think you're going to be a lot of cyber heroes out there. And I'm also really, well, I'm not excited about the fines, but I was really surprised about, also the personal fines. I thought you said you can afford them, Torbjørn, but I was like, okay, yeah, he's from Norway, of course he can afford them. But then I figured out, oh, he can't afford them, so I got that one in the end. And yeah, I really thought it was an important point about, the spreadsheets versus the ServiceNow triggers that triggers a workflow. So you're making sure that everything happens. Automation is just here to stay, right? So yeah, I think that was all from us today. Thank you so much to Christian and Torbjørn. Thanks for all you guys listening in. And yeah, join us at the next webinar. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Christian, I think you're the one turning off the webinar.
Maybe.
or else you guys can join